The diesel fumes mixed with morning dew, creating that specific scent that makes your stomach drop before your brain catches up. 3 black SUVs rolled down my gravel driveway at exactly 7:43 in the morning, their tires crunching stones that pinged against undercarriages like warning shots. My coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips, steam still curling up into the cool May air. Red and blue lights weren't flashing yet, but I could see them mounted on the roofs, waiting, ready. The county seal gleamed on all 3 doors, official and ominous. My heart started hammering against my ribs, that primal thud 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 that drowns out rational thought. 6 people emerged from the vehicles, maybe 7. I couldn't count properly because my hands had started trembling, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim of my mug. A woman in a navy blazer stepped out first, clutching a clipboard so tightly her knuckles had gone bone white. Behind her, 2 uniformed officers stood with hands resting on their belts in that casual but ready stance every cop learns in training. Another man in a suit was already photographing my property with a professional camera, the rapid-fire click of the shutter cutting through the morning silence. The air smelled like cut grass and rain-soaked earth and something else. Diesel exhaust. Coffee going cold. Fear, maybe, though I wouldn't admit that part yet. A crow called from somewhere in the pine trees behind my cabin, its voice harsh and mocking. The morning had started so normal: shower, breakfast, checking emails on the porch while the lake turned gold under the rising sun. Now it felt like the air before a tornado, that electric wrongness that makes dogs howl and birds go silent. I set the mug down on my porch railing, the ceramic scraping against weathered wood with a sound that seemed too loud. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Not yet, but I could feel the tremor starting deep in my chest, working its way outward. Through the kitchen window, I could see my wife Sarah frozen at the sink, dish soap still running over her fingers in white ribbons, her eyes wide as she watched the scene unfold. She'd been washing breakfast dishes, humming. 5 minutes ago, everything was fine. One of the officers was already walking the perimeter of my property, eyes scanning my boat dock with the methodical sweep of someone checking items off a list. He had a tablet in one hand, making notes with a stylus. Another officer was photographing everything. My shed, my boat, the kayak leaning against the sidewall, even my trash cans. Flash, click, flash, click. Building a case before I even knew what the charges were. The woman with the clipboard was marching toward me like she owned the place, her heels sinking into my lawn with each determined step. She'd worn heels to walk across wet grass. That told me everything I needed to know about how this was going to go. Professional, rehearsed, designed for maximum impact. Mr. Hoffman? Her voice was crisp, rehearsed, each word enunciated with the precision of someone who'd practiced this speech in front of a mirror. Professional malice wrapped in bureaucratic courtesy, delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I nodded, because my throat had gone dry, tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. Words felt impossible. She didn't wait for a verbal answer. Didn't need one. We have multiple reports of code violations, unpermitted construction, and environmental hazards on this property. Additionally, there are concerns about illegal dumping and potential water contamination affecting the lake ecosystem. You're required to vacate the premises immediately while we conduct a full investigation. The property is being placed under county review as of this moment. The words hit me like cold water. Vacate, investigation, environmental hazards. My lake house, the one I'd saved 15 years to buy, working double shifts and overtime weekends, the one where my daughter Emily took her first steps on that dock when she was 14 months old, was suddenly a crime scene. I opened my mouth to ask what violations, what construction, what hazards, but my voice came out as a croak. She wasn't listening anyway. She was already turning away, barking orders to the crew behind her in that tone people use when they want witnesses to hear how in charge they are. Start with the dock structure. I want measurements, material samples, photographs from every angle. Check the storage shed for unauthorized chemicals. Document everything. That's when I noticed the woman standing by the third SUV, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold with barely contained satisfaction. Coral lipstick, perfectly applied. White capri pants that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. Designer sunglasses perched on blonde hair that moved as one solid unit when she turned her head. She wasn't part of the official crew. She was just here to watch. Patricia Delgado, president of the Lake Marion Homeowners Association. The woman who'd made the last 2 months of my life a living hell. She saw me looking and smiled. Not a friendly smile. A victory smile. The kind of smile that says, "I told you I'd ruin you," without needing words. And that's when I realized the police weren't here for me. They were here for her. But to understand how we got here, how a Tuesday morning in May turned into a scene from a law enforcement documentary, I need to take you back. Back to when mornings still tasted like peace instead of panic. Back to before Patricia Delgado turned my retirement dream into a nightmare. Back 3 weeks, to when I still believed reasonable people could resolve problems through reasonable conversation. Let me rewind to April 27th, a Tuesday that started like every other Tuesday for the past 5 years. The sun broke over Lake Marion around 6:15 that morning, the way it always did in late spring, turning the water from black to navy to silver to gold in the span of 20 minutes. I sat on my dock with my coffee mug, the same blue ceramic one I'd had since my daughter made it in a pottery class 15 years ago, watching herons pick their way through the shallows on legs so thin they looked like they'd snap in a strong wind. The world woke up slow and easy around me. A bass jumped near the opposite shore, the splash echoing across still water. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower started its familiar drone. The cabin itself was nothing fancy, nothing that would make it into architectural magazines. 1,200 square feet of cedar siding and floor-to-ceiling windows, built in 1976 and renovated by the previous owner sometime in the early 2000s. But it was mine. 40 feet of private shoreline, a 1/4 acre of towering pine trees that whispered in the evening breeze, and silence so deep you could hear your own heartbeat if you held still long enough. I'd bought this place with money saved from 23 years of working as a commercial building inspector, mostly federal contracts that took me all over the Southeast. Courthouses where I'd check foundation integrity and HVAC systems. Post offices where I'd review electrical work and fire suppression installations. VA hospitals where I'd inspect everything from earthquake retrofitting to medical gas line installations. I knew building codes the way some people know baseball statistics, intimately, obsessively, well enough to quote chapter and verse from memory. My weekends here were spent fixing little things. A loose board on the back deck that creaked when you stepped on it. Repainting the shutters that forest green color Sarah loved, the one that reminded her of her grandmother's house in North Carolina. Replacing the old aluminum dock last summer after it developed soft spots that bent under foot traffic. The new composite decking was beautiful, gray with subtle wood grain texture, guaranteed for 25 years, rated for marine environments. I'd installed it myself over 3 weekends, measuring twice and cutting once, making sure every board was level and properly secured. Sarah taught 3rd grade online from the sunroom, addition we'd built 2 years ago that faced east to catch morning light. She'd set up her desk near the windows so she could see the lake while teaching phonics to 8-year-olds over Zoom. Sometimes I'd hear her reading stories aloud in her teacher voice, animated and patient, while I worked on some project in the garage. Our daughter Emily was finishing her freshman year at State, studying environmental science and calling home every Sunday to tell us about her classes. This place was supposed to be our retirement dream, the thing we'd work toward through every overtime shift and budget spreadsheet and year of saying no to vacations so we could save more. 5 more years and I could retire with full pension. 5 more years and we'd be here full-time. No more job sites, no more travel, just lake life and grandkids someday. The neighbors were fine. Better than fine, mostly. The Hendersons 2 lots over were both retired military. Rick had been a Marine Corps logistics officer. Jean had been a Navy nurse. They kept their property immaculate, American flag flying year-round, and they'd helped me install that dock last summer, refusing payment but accepting beer. Old Mr. Chun across the inlet kept to himself. Fished before dawn most mornings from a little aluminum boat he'd had since the 80s. We'd wave to each other across the water but rarely talked beyond friendly hellos. There was a homeowners association, technically, Lake Marion HOA, established in 1987 when the development first went in. I'd known about it when I bought the place. It was mentioned in the closing documents, a thick packet of covenants and bylaws I'd skimmed through but never worried about. The annual dues were $70. $70. I paid more than that monthly for internet. I'd mailed a check every January for 5 years and never heard a word from them. Never got meeting notices. Never saw anyone enforcing rules. I assumed it was one of those paper organizations that existed in theory but not in practice. I kept my grass trimmed to a reasonable height. Didn't blast music at night. Kept my trash cans in the garage except on collection days. Never thought twice about HOA politics or property disputes. Why would I? I was a building inspector. I knew codes, regulations, structural requirements. Everything on my property was up to standard, better than standard actually, because I had professional pride in doing things right. Then one Tuesday morning in late April, while I was replacing a porch light fixture that had started flickering, a white Lexus SUV pulled into my driveway. The vehicle alone should have been a warning. Pristine white paint, chrome accents, dealer plates still in the frame even though the registration sticker showed it was 2 years old. The kind of car that screamed, "I care very much what you think about my car." A woman emerged in athleisure where that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Lululemon leggings, a zip-up jacket with subtle designer branding, and running shoes so white they had to be brand new. Oversized sunglasses perched on salon-perfect blonde hair that had that specific texture of professional highlights and weekly blowouts. She had a leather portfolio under one arm, expensive-looking, the kind with brass corner protectors and a monogram embossed on the front. She surveyed my property with the critical eye of someone inspecting soldiers on parade ground, and I got the distinct impression she was finding it wanting. Her smile, when she finally looked at me, was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Bright, sharp, predatory. "Good morning." Her voice matched the smile, bright and sharp, like wind chimes made of knives. "You must be the new owner. I'm Patricia Delgado, president of the Lake Marion Homeowners Association. Welcome to the neighborhood." I wasn't new. I'd been living here for 5 years. But I climbed down the ladder anyway, wiped my hands on my jeans, and extended one for a handshake because that's what civilized people do. Her grip was firm, competitive, the kind of handshake designed to establish dominance rather than greet a neighbor. She held on just a fraction of a second too long, her eyes scanning past me to examine the cabin. "Lovely place," she said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but lovely. "Rustic charm. Very authentic." Authentic is what people say when they mean old and unfashionable. I smiled anyway. "I just wanted to introduce myself and go over a few community standards," she continued, already pulling documents from her leather portfolio. "I noticed a few items that need addressing. Your mailbox, for instance, it's the wrong color. Community standards require forest green with white lettering per section 4.2 of our covenants. Yours is black. And that boat dock." She pointed at my dock like it was a personal insult to her aesthetic sensibilities. "The composite decking isn't on the approved materials list. The original owners had pressure-treated pine. Southern yellow pine, specifically, stained in cedar tone. You'll need to replace it to match the original specifications." I blinked at her, genuinely confused. The mailbox had come with the house, had been there when I bought the place, presumably for years before that. The dock I'd replaced because the original had rotted through last summer, boards so soft you could push your thumb through them. I'd upgraded to composite specifically because it wouldn't rot, wouldn't need staining, would last decades longer than wood. It was better in every measurable way. "The dock's been there since June," I said, keeping my voice even and reasonable. 8 months. Nobody's said anything until now." "Well, I'm saying something now, Mr. Hoffman." Patricia pulled out a printed document, corners crisp and sharp like she'd been waiting specifically for this moment. The paper was still warm from her printer. "I'm issuing a formal notice of violation. You have 30 days to bring the property into compliance with community standards, or will be forced to assess fines of $50 per day until corrections are made. Additionally, there's the matter of your lawn height." She gestured at my grass, which looked perfectly normal to me, maybe 3.5 inches tall. Green. Healthy. Not brown, Not weedy, not full of dandelions. Maximum allowed grass height is 3.2 inches, she said, reading from the document. Yours is currently measuring at approximately 4 inches in several areas. That's a separate violation. And your kayak. My kayak, I repeated flatly. Visible from the street. Section 7.4 prohibits storage of recreational equipment in areas visible from community roadways. It creates visual clutter and impacts property values. The kayak was leaning against the side of my shed, barely visible behind a row of azalea bushes. You'd have to actively look for it to see it. I'd stored it there for 3 summers without incident. Patricia handed me the violation notice, still wearing that bright, sharp smile. I took it, scanning the bullet points listed in neat rows. Mailbox color. Dock materials. Grass height, maximum 3.2 inches. Current measurement 4.1 inches. She'd actually measured. Actually come on to my property with a ruler or measuring tape and measured my grass. Ma'am, I'm a building inspector, I said carefully, using my professional voice. The one I used when explaining code violations to contractors who didn't want to hear it. I've been doing this for 23 years. I know building codes, zoning regulations, material specifications. Nothing on my property violates county code. The dock didn't even require a permit under county regulations for residential repairs under 500 square feet using non-structural modifications to existing footprints. County regulations aren't HOA regulations, Mr. Hoffman. She tapped the portfolio with one manicured fingernail, the sound crisp and final. You signed the covenants when you purchased the property. They're legally binding. They supersede your personal preferences and professional opinions. I don't care if you're a building inspector or a Supreme Court justice. The rules apply equally to everyone. She glanced at her watch, a gesture so theatrical it had to be practiced. Big, obvious. A signal that she had more important places to be. I have a tennis lesson in 20 minutes, but please feel free to reach out if you have questions. My email address is listed on the letterhead. The office number goes to voicemail, but I check it twice daily. Have a blessed day, Mr. Hoffman. She was back in her Lexus before I could formulate a response, reversing down my driveway with the aggressive confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her entire privileged life. The tires kicked up a small spray of gravel that pinged against my truck's bumper. I stood there holding the violation notice, reading it once, then twice, then a third time to make absolutely certain I wasn't imagining things. At the bottom, in tiny print barely large enough to read without squinting, failure to comply within the specified time frame may result in escalating fines, legal action, property liens, and potential forced sale to recover costs. Forced sale. I looked down at the paper, at the list of petty complaints dressed up as serious violations, and I smiled. Not a friendly smile, a knowing smile, because I'd spent 23 years dealing with people who tried to use regulations and codes as weapons. Contractors who cut corners and cited obscure exemptions. Building owners who didn't want to pay for required upgrades and threatened lawsuits. I'd handled bigger bullies than Patricia Delgado, and they'd all learned the same lesson eventually. If you're going to use rules as weapons, you'd better know those rules better than your opponent. And I was very, very good at knowing the rules. The first email arrived at 6:47 the next morning, before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. Subject line, urgent. Additional violations identified. Patricia's personal Gmail account, but with the HOA logo embedded in the signature block like official letterhead. Mr. Hoffman, during my preliminary inspection yesterday, I identified several additional items requiring immediate attention. Your watercraft storage, kayak, remains in violation. Additionally, I've documented the following. Unauthorized fire pit within 50 feet of property lines, violation of wildfire prevention protocols per section 11.3, improper vegetation management, non-native azalea plantings without architectural review approval, and what appears to be an unpermitted storage shed extension or modification from original footprints. Please address these violations within 14 days. Best regards, Patricia Delgado, HOA President. I read it twice, set down my coffee, and pulled up the satellite view of my property on Google Maps. The fire pit was a simple metal ring, the kind you buy at any hardware store, positioned 37 feet from the nearest property line. I'd measured when I installed it specifically to comply with county fire codes. The azaleas were 3 bushes I'd planted along the driveway last fall. They'd cost $22 each at the garden center, and they were thriving in the partial shade. The shed hadn't been modified at all. It was the same structure that existed when I bought the place, visible in the real estate listing photos from 2019. I responded professionally, citing specific measurements and county codes, attaching photos showing the fire pit location with a measuring tape clearly visible. I included screenshots of the original listing photos showing the shed unchanged. I was calm, factual, professional. Patricia replied within 7 minutes. Mr. Hoffman, I understand you're new to community living and may not be familiar with HOA governance structures. County codes are minimum requirements for legal compliance. HOA covenants represent our community's commitment to maintaining property values and aesthetic harmony at levels exceeding those minimums. Your fire pit, regardless of county compliance, violates our more stringent standards. The azaleas are not on our approved native species list, which exists to preserve the natural ecosystem character of Lake Marion. I recommend consulting the community guidelines available on our website before making further modifications. Patricia, new to community living. I'd lived here 5 years. Paid dues every year without complaint. Never received a single communication from the HOA until yesterday. The third email arrived at 2:14 that afternoon while I was at a job site inspecting foundation work on a new courthouse annex. Mr. Hoffman, I attempted a follow-up inspection today and found your property unattended and unsecured. Please note that unattended properties with open structures, shed door was ajar, represent security risks to the community. Additionally, your trash receptacles are visible from the street on a non-collection day, another violation of community standards. I stared at my phone in disbelief. The shed door had probably blown open in the wind. The latch was old and sometimes didn't catch properly. I'd been meaning to replace it, and my trash cans were in my garage, same as always. I pulled up the security camera footage from my driveway and scrubbed through to 1:30 p.m. There was Patricia, walking up my driveway with her phone out, photographing my property. She'd opened my garage door, just lifted it from the outside without permission, and photographed my trash cans sitting exactly where they belonged. She'd also tried the shed door, found it unlocked, and opened it to photograph the interior. She was trespassing, actively, deliberately trespassing on my property and documenting things to manufacture violations. I called a lawyer that evening. Tom Richardson, a guy I'd served with in the Army 20 years ago, now practicing civil law in Charleston. I explained the situation while he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed. Michael, I've reviewed HOA covenants before, and trust me, half of what she's citing is probably unenforceable. The other half is petty harassment. You could fight it, absolutely. But here's the reality. It'll cost you $3,000, maybe $4,000 in legal fees just to file responses and counter motions. More if it goes to actual court. Sometimes the smartest play is fixing whatever she's complaining about, even if she's wrong, because it's cheaper than being right. I hated that answer. Hated it because it meant Patricia could harass people into compliance with threats and fake violations, and the cost of fighting back was prohibitive. She was counting on that. Counting on people doing the math and deciding submission was cheaper than justice. But I also understood Tom's logic. I had a job, a life, better things to do than spend months fighting over mailbox colors. So I tried the reasonable approach first. I repainted the mailbox forest green, ordered a replacement from the HOA-approved vendor list Patricia had helpfully included in her 4th email. It cost $93 for a mailbox that looked identical to my $40 one from Home Depot except for the color. I installed it on a Saturday morning, even photographed it from multiple angles, and emailed Patricia confirmation. She responded, "Mailbox noted. Please address remaining violations per timeline specified." I pulled up the 3 azalea bushes I'd planted, carefully dug them out with their root balls intact, and replanted them at Emily's apartment complex in Columbia. She was thrilled. They brightened up her entry area. I sent Patricia photographic proof of the empty space where they'd been. She responded, "Landscaping modification noted. Grass height still exceeds maximum allowable limits. Fire pit remains in violation. Shed security issue unresolved." That's when I started keeping records. Real records. I created a folder on my computer, HOA Lake Marion. Started printing every email. Saved screenshots with timestamps. Photographed everything. My grass height with a ruler lying on the ground. My fire pit with a measuring tape showing exact distance to property lines. My shed with the new latch I installed specifically to address her security concern. By the end of May, the folder was 2 inches thick. The citations escalated. Patricia issued a $500 fine for disruption of community aesthetics based on what she called non-compliance patterns. I hadn't even received official notice about most of the violations she was citing. She'd apparently decided that observations made during her trespassing expeditions counted as formal documentation. Then came a $750 fine for repeated non-compliance after I trimmed a tree branch that overhung my roof. The branch was on my property, confirmed by the survey map I had done when I bought the place. But Patricia claimed it was on HOA common property, therefore subject to their landscaping protocols. She sent that fine via certified mail with a lawyer's signature at the bottom. Some attorney in Colombia who apparently rubber-stamped whatever Patricia put in front of him. I paid it. Wrote a check for $750 with a note saying I disagreed with the assessment but wanted to resolve the matter amicably. She cashed it the same day. The next morning, I had another violation notice in my email. Unauthorized waterfront modifications detected. Your dock appears to have new lighting fixtures not approved by Architectural Review Committee. The lights were solar-powered bollards I'd installed 2 years ago. They'd been there longer than Patricia had been HOA president. That's when I stopped trying to be reasonable and started treating this like what it was. A campaign of targeted harassment that needed to be documented, analyzed, and ultimately defeated with the same methodical precision I'd used in 23 years of building inspections. I installed security cameras. 2 covering the driveway, 1 facing the dock, 1 aimed at the side yard where my shed stood. $40 cameras from Amazon with motion detection and cloud storage. Every time Patricia showed up, I'd have video evidence. I created a spreadsheet tracking every email, every fine, every violation notice with dates, times, and her exact wording. I cross-referenced each claim against the actual HOA covenants, county codes, and state property law. I took photographs of neighboring properties showing they had the same violations Patricia was citing on mine. Grass over 3.2 inches, visible kayaks, non-approved mailboxes. Sarah thought I was obsessing. "It's not worth the stress," she told me one evening as I sat at the kitchen table with highlighted documents spread across every surface. "Just do whatever she wants and be done with it." But I knew something Sarah didn't yet. Something I'd learned from years of dealing with code enforcement bullies and petty bureaucrats. People like Patricia don't stop when you comply. They escalate. Compliance doesn't satisfy them, it emboldens them. They see submission as weakness and weakness as invitation. Patricia was going to keep going until I broke or until she got bored. And I wasn't planning to break. The breaking point came on a Saturday in mid-June. Bright, clear morning. Temperature already climbing toward 80 by 9 a.m. I was teaching Emily how to check the boat engine. She was home for summer break and wanted to learn basic maintenance. We were kneeling on the dock, engine cover off, me showing her how to check oil levels and inspect the fuel line connections, when I heard shouting from up by the house. Patricia's voice, shrill and aggressive, carrying across the lawn. I stood up, wiped my hands on a rag, and looked toward the driveway. Patricia was standing next to a county truck, pointing at my dock and gesturing wildly. The county inspector, Dave Morrison, a guy I'd worked with on at least 3 federal projects over the years, looked uncomfortable, flipping through papers on a clipboard and clearly trying to de-escalate whatever confrontation was unfolding. "Dave," I called, walking up the hill toward them. "What's going on?" Dave grimaced, the expression of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "Hey, Michael. Got a complaint filed about unpermitted construction. New dock structure. Replaced rotted boards last summer," I said, keeping my voice calm and factual. Same footprint, same dimensions, same height. Residential repair exemption under County Code Section 12 to 407. Doesn't require permits. Patricia cut in, her voice rising to drown me out. It's clearly a new structure, not a repair, and it's built with materials that are leaching toxic chemicals into protected wetlands. This is an environmental hazard, and frankly, I'm appalled the county hasn't shut this down already. I stared at her. Composite decking doesn't leach chemicals. It's literally engineered for marine environments, approved by every environmental agency that regulates waterfront construction. It's more environmentally friendly than pressure-treated lumber, which actually does contain chemical preservatives. Dave knew this. I knew this. Patricia either didn't know or didn't care. "Ma'am," Dave said with professional patience, "I'll need to see documentation of the chemical concern. Environmental hazard claims require testing data or credible scientific evidence before we can take enforcement action." Patricia pulled out a printout, triumphantly flourishing it like she'd produced a smoking gun. It was a blog post from 2003 about vinyl siding off-gassing. Not composite decking. Not even remotely related to dock materials. And from 20 years ago, before modern manufacturing standards. Dave examined it, his expression carefully neutral. Then he set down his clipboard and walked to the dock, me following. He inspected the boards, checked the support posts, took photographs with his county-issued tablet. He pulled up something on the screen, probably county permit records, and scrolled through for a minute. "Mr. Hoffman, this is clearly a like-for-like replacement of existing infrastructure," he said loud enough for Patricia to hear. "Same footprint, same height, compliant materials. You're fine. No permit needed, no violations, no environmental concerns." Patricia's face went red, that particular shade of crimson that starts at the collar and climbs up the neck. "This is corruption. This is exactly what's wrong with county government. Good old boys protecting each other while environmental destruction goes unchecked. I'm reporting both of you to the State Regulatory Board, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Governor's Office." Dave packed his clipboard, his movements careful and deliberate. "Ma'am, you're certainly welcome to file any complaints you feel are appropriate. My findings are documented and based on county code. Have a good day." After he drove away, Patricia turned to me. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from rage. Pure, incandescent rage at being contradicted by someone with actual authority. "You think you're clever?" Her voice had dropped low, almost a hiss. "You think you can do whatever you want here just because you have friends in the county office? I will make your life hell, Mr. Hoffman. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will find every violation, every code you've broken, and I will drag you through so much legal action you'll be begging to sell this property just to escape." "I think I can follow the law on my own property," I said quietly, keeping my tone even. That's when she noticed Emily standing by the boat, phone out, recording everything. Patricia's mouth snapped shut mid-breath. For just a second, fear flickered across her face, the sudden realization that her threats had been documented. She turned on her heel and stormed to her Lexus, yanking the door open hard enough to make the hinges complain. Tires spit gravel in twin rooster tails as she peeled out of my driveway, accelerating hard enough to fishtail slightly on the turn. Emily lowered her phone, her hands trembling slightly. "Dad, she's insane." I put my arm around her shoulders, watching the dust settle across my driveway. My hands weren't trembling. They were steady, resolved. The fear I'd felt that morning when the county truck pulled up was gone, replaced by something colder and clearer. That's when I stopped trying to be polite. That's when I realized this wasn't going to end with reason or compromise. This was war, and Patricia had just made a tactical mistake by threatening me on camera, in front of a witness, after a county inspector had cleared my property. She'd given me exactly what I needed. Now I just had to use it. Monday morning, I took a personal day from work, told my supervisor I had family business to handle. Drove straight to the county courthouse in downtown Columbia, arriving when the clerk's office opened at 8:30. The building was one-eyed inspected 3 years ago. Beautiful 1920s architecture with modern additions. marble floors worn smooth by a century of foot traffic. I requested every public record related to the Lake Marion Homeowners Association. Articles of incorporation, annual registration renewals, board meeting minutes filed with the county, financial disclosure statements, covenant amendments. The clerk, a patient woman named Rosa who recognized me from previous inspections, pulled files from storage and set me up at a research table. For hours later, I had a stack of photocopies 2 inches thick and a legal pad filled with notes. The HOA had been established in 1987 when the development went in proper incorporation, all the right paperwork. But the original covenants had never been properly updated when the county rezoned the entire lake area in 2004 from residential recreational to residential conservation. That change invalidated several of the original restrictions, particularly ones about waterfront modifications and native landscaping. More interesting, the HOA's corporate registration with the state had lapsed in 2011 and was never renewed. They'd failed to file annual reports, failed to pay registration fees, failed to maintain active status. According to state law, an unregistered corporate entity can't enforce contracts, levy fines, or bring legal action. Patricia's HOA legally didn't exist. I drove from the courthouse to the State Environmental Protection Office, a modern building out by the interstate, requested water quality reports for Lake Marion, wetland protection maps, and shoreline development permits. Took another 2 hours, but I got what I needed. My dock sat in an area explicitly exempt from wetland protection regulations, outside the 50-foot buffer zone, in water shallow enough to classify as non-navigable under state definitions. The Environmental Office had it documented in a 2018 survey map. I got copies officially stamped and signed. Next stop, Margaret Chen's law office. No relation to my neighbor Mr. Chun, but the coincidence made me smile. Margaret specialized in property law and HOA disputes. Came highly recommended by Tom Richardson when I'd called him looking for someone who actually enjoyed fighting these battles. Her office was in a converted house near the university, bookshelves crammed with legal texts, framed degrees covering one wall. She listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and smiled. Mr. Hoffman, you have grounds for a harassment lawsuit, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But more interesting, she tapped a highlighted section in the HOA bylaws I'd brought. Your HOA never properly registered with the State Corporate Commission after their renewal lapsed in 2011. That means they have no legal standing to enforce anything. Every fine they've issued since then is invalid, potentially refundable with interest. What about the people who've already paid? I asked. If we can prove the HOA knowingly collected money without legal authority, that's fraud. Her expression was the look of a lawyer who'd just found a case she wanted to win. How many other homeowners do you think have been fined? I know of at least 6 just from talking to neighbors. Probably dozens over the years. Margaret pulled out a fresh legal pad. Here's what I recommend. File a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office alleging HOA abuse and illegal fine collection. Request a full audit of their finances. Meanwhile, I'll draft a cease and desist letter and prepare a civil filing. Discovery alone should be illuminating. I'm betting we find financial irregularities that make the fine collection look like pocket change. I hired her on the spot. That week, I filed the complaint with the Attorney General's office, 17 pages long with exhibits documenting every email, every fine, every threat. I attached financial records showing Patricia had collected over $90,000 in fines over 4 years, based on bank statements I'd obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request targeting the HOA's supposed public financial disclosures. Except the bank account the fines went into wasn't listed in any official HOA records. It was Patricia's personal account. I also requested a full audit of the HOA's corporate status and financial practices. The AG's office confirmed receipt and assigned an investigator within 3 days. Patricia didn't know any of this yet. She was still sending me violation notices, still showing up with her clipboard crew of retired board members who had nothing better to do than measure grass height and photograph kayaks. But now I was documenting every second. Recording conversations. South Carolina is a one-party consent state, so I didn't need her permission. Saving every email with read receipts enabled so I could prove she'd seen my responses. CCing my lawyer on every piece of correspondence. Building a case as methodical and thorough as any building inspection I'd ever conducted. Late one night, sitting in the courthouse basement archive going through property records that hadn't been digitized yet, I found something that made me actually laugh out loud in the silent room. The original Lake Marion development plan, filed in 1985, 2 years before the HOA was even incorporated. It included a clause about waterfront access rights, written into the original subdivision agreement before HOA covenants existed. It gave all lakefront property owners perpetual easement to maintain, modify, and improve their shoreline access structures as necessary for reasonable recreational use, without interference from any subsequent regulatory body, including homeowners associations. It was right there in the county records, signed by the developer, filed with the county, incorporated into every single property deed for lakefront lots. Patricia had been trying to enforce restrictions that were directly contradicted by the original development rights. She thought she understood the law. She didn't know the law had been written in my favor before she'd ever heard of Lake Marion. I photographed every page, got certified copies from the clerk, and added them to my growing file. The case was building itself. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to deploy it. That moment came faster than I expected. The HOA called an emergency meeting for July 15th, exactly 2 months after Patricia's first violation notice. The email came marked "Mandatory Attendance" in capital letters, sent to all homeowners with current violations or compliance issues under review. Translation: she was planning a public shaming session, probably hoping to intimidate me into surrendering. I showed up 30 minutes early. The meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. in the community center. A converted double garage at the development entrance that smelled like mildew, old carpet, and decades of accumulated committee meetings. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows facing a table up front. The table had 3 nameplates: Patricia Delgado, President; Richard Mosley, Treasurer; Karen Whitmore, Secretary. I chose a seat in the 3rd row center aisle. Good visibility. Close enough to hear everything but not so close it looked confrontational. I had a leather portfolio with me, thick enough to make people notice. Inside, every document I'd collected, organized with color-coded tabs. Attorney General complaint, corporate registration records, bank statements, environmental clearances, survey maps, recordings transcribed to text, photos, emails. About 30 residents filed in over the next 20 minutes. Some I recognized from neighborly waves across the lake. Most were strangers. The Hendersons arrived and gave me subtle nods before sitting a few rows back. Mr. Chun took a seat in the very back row, arms folded, expression neutral. Patricia arrived at 6:03, making an entrance like this was a courtroom and she was the judge. Navy blazer, pearls, that same sharp smile. Richard Mosley looked exactly like you'd expect a retired insurance adjuster to look. Late 60s, gray hair, reading glasses on a chain, expression of someone who'd signed off on forms without reading them for 40 years. Karen Whitmore had perfected the art of aggressive cardigans, her pastel sweater somehow radiating hostility. Patricia called the meeting to order with a gavel that seemed excessive for what was essentially a neighborhood complaint session. The bang echoed off the tin ceiling. She started with procedural items. Treasurer's report. Richard read numbers from a sheet without looking up. Landscaping contract renewals. Complaints about the community entrance sign needing repainting. Each item was gavelled through with minimal discussion. Then she got to the main event. Item 7 on tonight's agenda, Patricia announced, pulling out a folder that matched mine in thickness. Ongoing violations at 447 Lakeshore Drive, owned by Mr. Michael Hoffman. Mr. Hoffman has repeatedly and willfully refused to comply with community standards despite numerous notices, multiple warnings, and good faith efforts by this board to work with him cooperatively. She paused for dramatic effect. To date, Mr. Hoffman has accumulated violations totaling $3,200 in fines plus penalties. This represents the most serious compliance failure in the history of this association. I move that we vote on whether to place a lien on the property and begin foreclosure proceedings to recover these costs. Murmurs rippled through the room. $3,000 sounded like a lot. Foreclosure sounded serious and official. Several residents turned to look at me, trying to figure out what kind of person racks up that kind of debt to their own neighborhood association. "Mr. Hoffman," Patricia said, her smile gleaming like a shark's, "would you like to address the board before we vote?" I stood slowly, picking up my portfolio. "I would, thank you." The room went quiet as I walked to the front. Patricia's expression flickered, just for a moment, when she saw how thick my folder was. I set it on the table between us with a solid thump. "Before I address your concerns," I said, projecting my voice clearly to reach the back row, "I'd like to submit these documents into the official record of this meeting. First, a letter from the county building department confirming that all construction and modifications on my property are legal, properly exempted from permitting requirements where applicable, and in full compliance with all relevant codes." I slid the letter across the table. Patricia didn't touch it. Second, an environmental clearance letter from the State Environmental Protection Office confirming that my dock poses no ecological risk and is explicitly outside wetland protection zones as defined by state regulation. Another document across the table. Third, communications from my attorney regarding the validity of this HOA's corporate status and its legal authority to levy fines or enforce covenants. Patricia's smile tightened. Fourth, I'd like to present evidence of selective enforcement. These are photographs of 14 properties in this community with identical violations to those I've been cited for: grass over 3.2 inches, visible recreational equipment, non-approved mailbox colors. None of these properties have received violation notices. I laid out the photos in a neat grid. Residents started whispering, recognizing their own properties in some of the pictures. Fifth, I have recordings, legal recordings under South Carolina one-party consent laws, of HOA board members trespassing on my property without permission and making verbal threats of harassment. The murmurs got louder. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Karen was suddenly very interested in her notes. Sixth, and most relevant to tonight's discussion, I have documentation showing that the Lake Marion Homeowners Association failed to maintain its corporate registration with the state and has been operating as an unregistered entity since 2011. 14 years. I pulled out the state corporate search results and laid them on the table in front of Patricia. An unregistered corporate entity has no legal standing to enforce contracts, levy fines, or collect money from residents under South Carolina corporate law, which means every fine issued by this board in the past 14 years was collected without legal authority. The room erupted, residents shouting questions. Someone said, "Wait, what?" Richard grabbed the corporate search document, scanned it, and went pale. Karen was already gathering her things. "That's ridiculous," Patricia said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. "We've been operating continuously since 1987. Our incorporation has never lapsed. Operating, yes. Legally registered with the State Corporate Commission as required by law? No." I spread out the registration history, each page stamped with state seals. "Your annual registration lapsed in 2011 when you failed to file the required renewal and pay the registration fee. Nobody corrected it. The state administratively dissolved the corporation. You're not technically a legal entity anymore." Richard stood abruptly. "I didn't know about this. I've been signing financial reports assuming everything was legitimate." "Then perhaps you should have done your due diligence as treasurer," I said calmly. "Furthermore," I continued, turning back to face the audience, "I filed a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office regarding fraudulent fine collection and misuse of HOA funds. They've opened an investigation with priority status." The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that old carpet. "You can't prove any of this," Patricia said, but she was gripping the edge of the table hard enough that her knuckles had gone white. "I already have." I pulled out my phone, opened the voice recording app, and played the clip from the confrontation in June. Patricia's voice came through clearly. I will make your life hell. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will find every violation, every code you've broken, and I will drag you through so much legal action you'll be begging to sell this property just to escape." Her face went ashen. Several residents had their phones out now, recording this meeting the way Emily had recorded that confrontation. "That's harassment," someone said from the back row. "That's actually threatening." Mr. Henderson stood. "You telling us we've been paying fines to an organization that doesn't legally exist? Because I paid $700 last year for trimming a tree on my own property." Hands started going up around the room. People calling out amounts. "I paid $400 for a shed color, $600 for lawn violations, $900 for dock repairs. And where did that money go?" Patricia was charged with fraud, operating an illegal business, and harassment. She pled out eventually, restitution of all fines collected plus interest, 2 years probation, community service. She moved out of Lake Marion by the end of August, selling her house at a loss to escape the neighborhood where everyone knew what she'd done. The Hendersons threw a party at my place in September. 30 people, maybe 40, grilling on the shore, kids swimming off my perfectly legal composite dock. Old Mr. Chun brought homemade dumplings and smiled more in one afternoon than I'd seen in 5 years. We toasted justice with beers as the sun set. The local paper ran a story, "Retired Federal Inspector Exposes HOA Fraud Ring." Emily's viral video had been viewed 4 million times by then, spawning dozens of copycat stories from people sharing their own HOA nightmares. News stations called for interviews. I declined most of them. This wasn't about fame or revenge. It was about refusing to be bullied and having the knowledge, resources, and patience to fight back properly. Margaret Chun sent me a bill for her services, surprisingly reasonable, with a handwritten note. "Best case I've worked in years. Thank you for having better documentation than most corporate clients." That fall, Lake Marion felt like it had when I first bought the place. Quiet mornings, friendly neighbors, nobody measuring grass or photographing kayaks. The community garden the Hendersons organized actually happened, 20 volunteers, raised beds built from reclaimed lumber, vegetables shared freely. I retired in December, 2 months earlier than originally planned. 23 years of building inspections, enough pension to live comfortably, and absolutely no desire to spend one more day dealing with bureaucratic nonsense when I could be sitting on my dock watching herons hunt. Emily came home for winter break and we refinished the dock bench together, her idea. Cedar with brass fittings, a plaque with a Thoreau quote she'd picked. "If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer." Sarah made hot chocolate and we sat on that bench on Christmas Eve, the three of us, watching stars reflect in dark water. "Are you glad you fought back?" Emily asked. "Or do you wish you just ignored her?" I thought about it. About the stress, the late nights, the folders full of documentation. About Patricia's face when she realized she'd lost. About the $93,000 returned to residents who'd been bullied into paying. "I'm glad I fought," I said. "Not because I won. Because refusing to be intimidated is worth something on its own." The lake froze at the edges that winter, thin sheets of ice that crackled when disturbed. By March it had thawed and spring returned with its promise of new beginnings. Mornings still brought coffee and herons, but now they also brought neighbors who waved from across the water, who stopped by to share fish or garden vegetables, who didn't measure each other's grass height or count the days trash cans stayed visible. The composite dock held up beautifully through winter storms. The mailbox stayed forest green because I actually liked that color. The kayak leaned against the shed, and nobody cared. I learned something through all this, something I'd known intellectually but needed to experience viscerally. Power without accountability always corrupts. Bullies thrive on silence and isolation. And sometimes the appropriate response to tyranny isn't anger or revenge. It's methodical, patient, documented resistance. I didn't destroy Patricia because I hated her. I didn't even particularly dislike her as a human being. I just refused to let her destroy something I'd worked 15 years to build. The system did the rest because the system works when you know how to use it properly. Now I sit here most mornings, coffee in hand, watching the sun turn water to gold. The dock is solid. The cabin is exactly as I want it. My property, my peace, my rules based on actual law rather than petty tyranny. And if someone ever asks me whether I forgave Patricia for what she tried to do, I'll tell them the truth. Forgiveness was never the question. Justice was. And justice, when built on facts and law and patience, doesn't need anger to function. It just needs someone willing to do the work. Someone who knows the rules better than the bully. Someone who refuses to be intimidated by clipboards and threatening emails and manufactured violations. I was that someone, and I'd do it again. What would you have done in my position? Would you have forgiven them and moved on, choosing peace over confrontation? Or would you have let justice finish the job, ensuring they couldn't hurt anyone else? The answer matters less than the question itself. Because that question, that choice between submission and resistance, is one we all face eventually. And how we answer defines who we are when the stakes matter. I chose resistance. I chose documentation. I chose to fight back with the same tools she'd used against me, except I used them honestly and lawfully. And in the end, that made all the difference.